Leela had never been to Black Hollow, yet from the moment she drove down the narrow, winding road leading to her inheritance, the world felt subtly wrong. Trees arched overhead like clawed fingers, their branches interweaving to blot out the fading sunlight. The air was thick with damp earth, and something faintly metallic that clung to her skin. The town she had passed earlier seemed quaint, cheerful, almost storybook-like, but now it existed in her memory as if it belonged to someone else, distant and unreal. The house itself loomed at the end of the road, Victorian and immense, its turrets and gables shadowed against the sky. A cold wind pressed against her as she approached, carrying a faint scent of mildew and decay. The lawyer who had arranged the inheritance had been hesitant, speaking in hushed tones. "The house, it's special," he said. "Some say it has a mind of its own." Leela had laughed nervously. She was 30, practical and rational. Ghosts and curses did not exist in her world. She had unpacked only the essentials, exploring the vast halls of the mansion. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced like restless spirits. The silence inside pressed heavily on her, almost alive. Midnight brought the first real terror. She heard a faint scratching sound outside her bedroom, a soft, deliberate tap, tap, tap like fingernails on wood. Her heart pounded. She spun in every direction, searching the shadows. Then a whisper slithered into her mind. "Leela." It had no source. It came from everywhere and nowhere. She froze, clutching her blanket. Sleep eventually claimed her, but dreams brought endless hallways stretching impossibly, doors opening to more doors, shadows moving in patterns she could not track, and voices, countless voices calling her name, whispering, laughing, pleading, accusing. The next morning, subtle disturbances had already begun. A chair in the parlor was slightly askew. A picture she had straightened the night before now leaned to the left. Doors she had locked were ajar. The air in the house felt heavier, as though it breathed. Curiosity and fear warred inside her, but Leela pressed on. She felt the house watching, aware of her every movement. Something ancient seemed to lurk in its walls, patient and unyielding. By the end of the day, she realized she was no longer just visiting. She was already entangled in its presence. By the second morning, Leela realized that Black Hollow was more than just a silent town. It was a place alive with secrets she could not yet understand. The streets, which had seemed picturesque from a distance, now felt oppressive. Shops with cheerful signs stood closed behind heavy wooden shutters, and even the trees seemed to lean toward her as she walked. Every footstep echoed unnaturally, as if the air itself were listening. She decided to visit the town center to gather supplies. The locals avoided her gaze, casting sideways glances filled with unease. One elderly man, his face lined and pale, muttered, "Some houses, they don't let you go once they know you." Leela laughed nervously, but he continued, whispering, "The walls remember. They see everything." She pressed for more, but he only shook his head and shuffled away, leaving her with an uncomfortable chill in her chest. Even in the small grocery store, the atmosphere felt wrong. Shelves were lined with goods, yet something about them seemed unnatural, like the colors were too vivid, too clean. The clerk smiled politely but said nothing, watching her with eyes that seemed empty, like windows into a void. Leela bought some food quickly, the uneasy feeling crawling into her bones. Back at the estate, the house seemed to respond to her absence. Doors she had closed swung open slightly, faint drafts whispering through the halls. Shadows clung to corners, retreating when she turned, but returning the moment she looked away. The mirror in the hallway, which had been covered with a dusty cloth, now glimmered faintly as though aware she had left it untouched for the day. She resisted the urge to look. Night fell heavier than ever. The whispers returned, growing louder, insistent, layered with voices she did not recognize. They argued, laughed, cried, and sometimes whispered in languages she could understand but could not fully comprehend. Words echoed in her mind even as she covered her ears. Sleep became a nightmare she could not escape. In her dreams, she wandered hallways that twisted impossibly, stairs spiraling upward into darkness, doors opening to rooms filled with shadows of figures she recognized, but had never met. On the third night, she woke to the sound of tapping again, louder this time. It was coming from the hallway outside her bedroom. She sat up in bed, trembling. The whisper came again, closer, almost inside her head. "Leela, come." Heart pounding, she stepped into the hallway. The shadows seemed to shift in response, stretching toward her, forming shapes both human and inhuman. She stumbled back toward her room, only to find the door had vanished, replaced by a blank wall. Panic gripped her. The house had changed, subtly but deliberately, and she realized she was no longer fully in control of her movements. Days began to blend together. Each morning, objects were moved, subtle changes accumulating into a pattern she could not understand. A chair was missing one day, returned the next, now splintered. Mirrors reflected strange distortions, walls seemed to breathe, and the whispers became impossible to ignore. They spoke in her voice sometimes, repeating her thoughts in cruel, mocking tones. She wrote frantic notes in a journal, hoping to keep some grasp of reality. Each note, however, seemed altered the next morning, letters rearranged into cryptic warnings. "Stay inside. They are waiting. Do not resist." By the end of the week, Leela felt herself fraying. The isolation, the whispers, and the shadows had begun to intrude on every thought, every moment. The town outside felt like a dream she could no longer reach, its bright streets and laughing children distant and unreal. The house was alive, aware, patient, and it had claimed her attention, her fear, her mind. As she finally collapsed into her bed, exhausted and terrified, the whisper came one last time before sleep claimed her. "You cannot leave. We are always here." By the beginning of the second week, Leela had stopped venturing outside the house. The town, with its silent streets and wary glances, had begun to feel like a distant memory, unreal and unreachable. She stayed within the Whitmore estate, wandering its endless corridors and vast, dusty rooms, her senses sharpened to every creak, every whisper, every shift in the shadows. The mirror in the hallway had become the center of her waking thoughts. It was freestanding, coated in a thin layer of dust, yet its surface shimmered faintly, as if it were aware of her gaze even when she tried to look elsewhere. One night, driven by a mixture of fear and fascination, she approached it. Her reflection stared back, but it was wrong. Its eyes were hollow, dark voids that seemed to pull her in. Its smile was cruel, mocking, and yet it moved independently, mimicking gestures she hadn't made. "You should not be here," it whispered, its voice both hers and not hers. Leela stepped back, trembling. She wanted to flee to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the house, but the corridors had shifted again. The hallways twisted impossibly, doors led to walls, and the rooms she had walked through countless times now seemed unfamiliar, almost alive. The house was aware of her movements, anticipating her reactions. Night after night, the shadows grew bolder. They emerged from corners, pooling in shapes she recognized, faces of neighbors, friends, even herself, but always distorted, grinning and silent. They followed her through the rooms, slipping behind doors, lingering just out of sight, yet always present. Sometimes they formed grotesque tableaus, frozen moments of horror that she could not look away from. Sleep became impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, the house reached into her dreams. Hallways stretched endlessly, staircases curved back upon themselves, and the shadows whispered her name with voices she had never heard before. One dream after another blurred together, until she could no longer distinguish between night and day. Desperate for understanding, she began to explore the house with more intent. The attic revealed a collection of old journals, yellowed with age. Each chronicled the experiences of past occupants, whispers that spoke only to their fears, shadows that mirrored their every thought, and the inevitable descent into madness. Each journal ended with the same warning: "Do not trust your eyes. The house remembers." Leela realized she was no longer alone. The house had claimed her attention, her mind, and her very presence. Attempts to leave failed, exits twisted impossibly, looping back to the hallway with the mirror. Every door, every staircase, every corridor seemed to conspire to trap her further. One night she confronted the mirror directly. Her reflection smiled wider, eyes hollow. It spoke plainly this time. "You belong here. You always did." The words reverberated in her skull. Panic surged, but she found herself unable to turn away. Her consciousness began to fray, splitting between herself and the reflection that now felt like another entity entirely. Shadows pressed closer, whispering in unison, echoing every fear, every memory she had tried to bury. By the end of the chapter, Leela no longer trusted her senses. The house had become a living labyrinth, her mind a canvas for its endless manipulation. Every whisper, every shadow, every reflection reminded her that she had entered a place that did not forgive curiosity or defiance. And in the silence, the mirror waited patient, its surface rippling, always watching, always hungry. By the third week, Leela had ceased counting the days. Time in the Whitmore estate had warped. Mornings felt like nights, and nights stretched endlessly. The corridors had begun to take on a life of their own. Staircases twisted into impossible spirals. Doors opened into rooms she had never seen before, and the shadows moved with intent, always just beyond the corner of her vision. Sleep was a distant memory. When she closed her eyes, the house invaded her dreams with relentless persistence. Hallways stretched into infinity, lined with the distorted faces of people she once knew, their mouths frozen and screams were wide, mocking smiles. Whispers echoed endlessly, repeating her fears aloud, questioning her sanity. "Why did you come? Do you belong here? You cannot leave." The mirror had become an obsession. Each night it whispered more clearly, its voice layering over her own thoughts. Sometimes it mimicked her speech perfectly. Other times it carried a cruel distortion, an almost imperceptible echo of something older, something malicious. "You are mine now," it said one night, the words curling like smoke into her mind. She tried to resist, but the house responded. Shadows clung to her even in the brightest rooms, darkening corners she had once thought safe. Objects moved of their own accord, books sliding across shelves, chairs tipping over, drawers opening and slamming shut. It was as if the house were testing her, learning her patterns, bending reality around her psyche. In desperation, she explored the attic further. She discovered a hidden compartment behind a false panel in the wall. Inside were more journals, filled with frantic scribblings, pages torn and water-stained. They chronicled the experiences of past residents, the whispers, the shadows, the mirror, and the ultimate surrender to the house. One entry chilled her more than the rest. "I tried to leave. I ran through corridors that should have led out. I found myself back in the same hallway, the mirror waiting. It knows you, it wants you, and it will have you." Leela realized then that the house did not merely trap bodies, it trapped minds. Her own consciousness felt fragile, fraying at the edges, splitting between herself and the entity reflected in the mirror. The shadows whispered in unison, calling her name, echoing her fears, mocking her attempts to retain sanity. Days bled into nights in an endless cycle. Hunger and fatigue were secondary to the house's manipulations. She began conversing with the shadows, bargaining, pleading, even apologizing. Some seemed to respond in kind, twisting their forms into shapes that resembled familiar faces, but none spoke words she could fully comprehend. Their silence was oppressive, each movement deliberate, calculated, a mirror to her deepest terrors. One evening, she wandered into the nursery she had discovered in the first days. The broken toys were no longer still. They whispered, calling her name, recounting memories she had never lived, revealing secrets she could not have known. Leela's reflection in the cracked nursery mirror grinned wider, eyes black voids, speaking in a voice that now seemed fully independent. "You cannot escape. You are already part of us." Her screams echoed through the halls unanswered. Even her own voice seemed alien, detached from her body. She tried to flee the nursery, but the doors had shifted. The hallways stretched farther than they should have. She was trapped in a labyrinth that was alive, aware, patient. By the end of chapter 4, Leela's sense of self had begun to dissolve. The house's influence was total. Every thought, every breath, every heartbeat was entwined with its presence. The mirror awaited her return nightly. Shadows clung closer, and the whispers never ceased. She was no longer merely a resident. She was becoming an extension of the house itself, her mind a canvas for its eternal manipulation. And through it all, a single truth became undeniable. The Whitmore estate did not forgive curiosity, and it never released what it claimed. By the fourth week, Leela no longer recognized herself. Her reflection in the mirrors no longer mimicked her movements. It moved with intention, grinning, whispering, and speaking in voices she could no longer distinguish from her own. Her thoughts, once private, now rippled through the house as if it had learned to read them. Every heartbeat, every breath, every fleeting fear was catalogued, twisted, and amplified by the walls themselves. The corridors had become impossibly long, winding, and ever-changing. Rooms she had memorized a week ago now appeared differently. Furniture rearranged, doors where walls had been, staircases spiraling into ceilings that should not exist. The house was alive, learning, adapting to her, ensuring that no corner offered comfort, no shadow was safe, no mirror was neutral. Sleep was non-existent. Every time she closed her eyes, she was thrust into a world that mirrored the house yet was more nightmarish. Shadows twisted into grotesque figures, mouths opening to scream in silence, their eyes black pools reflecting her fears. She ran down hallways of endless length, chasing non-existent doors, her own voice calling her name from every direction. The mirror's whispers became commands. Step closer. Do not resist. You belong here. Her reflection no longer waited silently. It emerged from the surface, stepping into the hallway as if the glass were a doorway. Its lips moved in exact opposition to hers, yet its words carried weight, authority, a malicious intelligence that seemed independent of the house itself. She fled through the hallways, but the house anticipated her every movement. Shadows trailed her, sometimes forming figures she loved, sometimes figures she feared, each one whispering secrets she could not remember living. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with her fear, bending the space around her into endless loops. In the attic, Leela discovered a collection of journals she had missed before, stacked behind old crates. Each one chronicled the descent of previous occupants into madness, all following the same pattern: whispers, shadows, reflections, surrender. One entry was particularly chilling. I tried to scream, but the house had already claimed my voice. My mind is no longer mine. Every thought I have, every memory I cherish belongs to them now. Resistance is impossible. Do not come here. Reading it, Leela realized she had already begun that process. She could feel herself splitting, fragments of her consciousness scattered across the rooms, existing simultaneously in dreams, reflections, and the empty spaces between shadows. Her own memories began to distort, merging with the whispers and visions, until she could no longer tell where she ended and the house began. Her reflection in the mirror stepped closer again, smiling wider, eyes black voids. It spoke clearly, undeniably. You are mine, you always were. Your resistance is meaningless. Leela's knees buckled. She sank to the floor as the shadows surrounded her, pressing closer, whispering, laughing, crying. Every sound she made echoed in the walls, amplified and twisted. Every flicker of light became a distortion. Every corner she turned revealed another horror. She realized fully that the house had claimed her. Not just her body, but her mind, her memories, her very soul. By the end of chapter 5, Leela's identity had fractured almost entirely. The mirror had become her constant companion. Shadows followed her without effort, and the house itself seemed to breathe through her, move through her, speak through her. She was no longer merely a resident. She had become part of the Whitmore estate, a new thread in its web of whispers, shadows, and endless corridors. And still, the house waited for more. By the 5th week, Leela had ceased distinguishing between waking and dreaming. The Whitmore estate had become an extension of her mind, and her mind had become an extension of the estate. Hallways twisted endlessly. Rooms shifted while she walked through them. Staircases curved impossibly, and the shadows moved with deliberate purpose. The house no longer waited for her. It was her. The mirror had become a portal. Each night her reflection stepped out fully, no longer dependent on the glass, speaking with authority she could no longer resist. "You are ours," it whispered, eyes black as voids, "and now you understand." Her own voice responded, yet it felt foreign, distant, a fragment of her former self. Desperate flashes of memory returned. Faces of townspeople, long-forgotten streets, her life before Black Hollow. They all seemed like a dream she could no longer reach. Outside the house, the town went on, oblivious. Children played, neighbors laughed, and life passed peacefully, unaware of the darkness that had consumed her. The shadows pressed closer. They whispered in unison, voices layered with all the previous occupants, their cries, pleas, and warnings intertwining with her own thoughts. She could feel them moving through her, memories she had never lived twisting into her consciousness. Her body wandered the endless corridors, her eyes vacant, hollow, yet aware of every corner, every crack, every ripple in the walls. In the attic, the journals she had once read lay scattered across the floor, pages fluttering though there was no wind. She saw names, faces, fragments of those who had come before her and understood fully. The Whitmore estate was a predator, patient, eternal, consuming minds, bending reality, waiting for the next arrival. Her reflection in the mirror smiled, wider than ever. Its black eyes seemed infinite, and its voice merged with the whispers of the house. "You are part of us now. You are endless. You belong here." And in that moment, Leela realized she no longer wanted to resist. There was no outside, no escape, no return to the life she had known. Resistance had become meaningless. The house pulsed through her, spoke through her, moved through her. Her consciousness scattered, blending with the shadows, the walls, the endless corridors. The whispers, once terrifying, became her constant companions. They spoke secrets she had never known, revealed horrors she had never imagined. She wandered endlessly through the rooms, conversed silently with the shadows, and watched herself reflected in mirrors that now showed not one, but many forms, hers, and those of all the souls the house had claimed before. By the end, she had ceased to be simply Leela. She was a fragment, a thread in the vast, eternal tapestry of the estate. Her fears, her thoughts, her memories had become one with the house, feeding it, sustaining it, expanding it. The Whitmore estate no longer waited for her. It was complete, patient, aware, and eternal. Outside, the world remained bright and unaware. The town thrived. Children laughed. Neighbors waved. But inside the estate, corridors stretched infinitely, mirrors reflected horrors beyond imagination. And shadows whispered for eternity, always calling, always waiting for the next curious soul to wander too close. And somewhere in the deepest hallways, in the darkest corners, a faint whisper echoed through the walls, patient and eternal. "Leela, you are ours, and we will never let go." Rain pelted the winding road like a torrent of needles as Evelyn's old sedan struggled over the slick asphalt. The GPS signal flickered, then died entirely, leaving her stranded in darkness. The small town of Graybridge had seemed charming in the daylight, quaint houses, brick streets, but now, under a storm-darkened sky, it felt like a trap. She gripped the steering wheel, the tires skidding slightly in the puddles. Ahead, a single street lamp flickered weakly, casting jagged shadows over a sign that read, "Welcome to Graybridge, population 623. A sense of unease curled in her stomach. Evelyn had come for solitude. A writer by trade, she sought isolation to complete her latest novel, and the town's old, abandoned inn seemed perfect. It was cheap, secluded, and surrounded by forests. The inn itself looked like a relic, peeling paint, windows clouded with grime, and the faint smell of rot wafting through the air. She parked the car and stepped inside. The lobby was a time capsule, dusty furniture, a broken chandelier, and the faint smell of mildew. No one greeted her. She called out, "Hello," Her voice echoed off the walls. A faint whisper answered back. She froze. The whisper was too soft to make out, but it carried an unmistakable warning. Leave Evelyn's rational mind argued. Probably a draft, or maybe a trick of the wind. Still, her heartbeat quickened. She decided to check the room she had booked and shake off the growing tension. The stairs creaked under her weight. On the second floor, the hall stretched endlessly, doors lining either side like silent sentinels. The shadows between them seemed to pulse, almost breathing. She found her room, 207, and unlocked it. Inside, the air was thick, almost viscous, and the furniture looked as though it had been left mid-motion decades ago. A bedspread was crumpled as if someone had just vacated it. Evelyn shivered. Then she heard it, a low, guttural hum coming from the corner of the room. The hair on her arm stood on end. She turned and in the dim light saw a mirror on the wall. Something moved behind it. Her reflection wasn't entirely hers. The eyes staring back were darker, hollow. A thin smile crept across the mirrored face, though her own lips were still pressed in a tight line. She stumbled back. The whisper returned, clearer this time. You shouldn't be here. A sudden crash from the hall made her spin. She wasn't alone. Sleep didn't come that night. Every shadow seemed to move independently. Every creak and groan of the old inn resonated like whispers just beyond her hearing. She tried to write. Hopping the words would ground her in reality, but her pen shook uncontrollably. At dawn, Graybridge looked normal again. The sun broke through clouds, casting golden light over the quaint town. But Evelyn didn't feel relief, only a gnawing sense that something was watching her, waiting. She stepped outside to explore. The town was nearly empty, save for a few figures moving silently down the streets, heads down, never looking her way. The locals' eyes seemed dull, as if their souls had been drained and their whispers barely audible, though she felt them in her mind. Leave, leave. Curiosity pushed her forward. She found an old library tucked between two brick buildings. Inside, dust motes danced in slanted sunbeams, and shelves towered like silent guardians of forgotten knowledge. Evelyn's fingers brushed against spines of leather-bound books, and one fell open on its own. A yellowed page revealing a hand-drawn map of the town. A red circle marked the inn. Around it scribbled notes read, "The Hollow beware. Do not stay past the third night." Her blood ran cold. Third night, she had arrived that morning. The whispers from last night suddenly made sense. She wanted to leave, but the rain began again, heavy and unyielding. Roads became rivers. Car tires sank into mud. The town seemed to close in around her. That evening she heard it again, the hum, the low, guttural resonance from her room. But this time it wasn't coming from the inn. It came from the woods behind the town, a rhythmic chant, almost like a ritual. She saw shadows moving between the trees, tall and unnatural. Terrified, she ran back to the inn, but the forest felt endless. Every turn she took led her back to the same path, the same chanting shadows circling her. By the time she reached the inn, drenched and trembling, the doors opened before she could knock, as though they had been expecting her. The whispers had grown louder, and they were no longer alone. Evelyn's room smelled of decay, but the decay wasn't just physical, it was alive. She could hear faint scratching from the walls, like nails running along wood. The hum returned, louder and more insistent. She pressed her back against the door, heart hammering. Then the mirror moved. Not her reflection, something behind it stepped out. A figure tall and thin, its skin pale as moonlight, eyes black voids, extended a hand toward her. Evelyn's scream tore through the room, but no sound came out. The figure whispered her name. Evelyn stayed forever. She stumbled back, tripping over the bed. In a flash, it vanished, but the mirror remained, rippling like water. She saw multiple faces now, all distorted, all screaming silently, all trying to claw their way into the real world. Her phone buzzed. Relief, hope, no. A text from an unknown number. You shouldn't have come. It's too late. Shaking, she left the room. The hallway had changed. Doors that weren't there yesterday now lined the walls, all slightly ajar, shadows spilling out like liquid darkness. Whispers came from each, calling her name in countless variations. Evelyn ran, seeking the lobby, the exit, anything familiar. The staircase split into two paths she didn't remember. Each step echoed unnaturally, and the shadows above her twisted into grotesque forms, watching, waiting. She turned a corner and froze. A child stood there, soaked, pale, eyes too wide, holding a cracked doll. "Do you want to play?" it asked. Evelyn wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The child's mouth opened unnaturally wide, and dozens of tiny whispering mouths spilled out of its throat. "Stay, stay, stay." Evelyn bolted down the corridor, barely escaping the child's reach. She found the lobby doors and pushed. Locked. Not jammed, not broken, locked. No key, no latch, nothing. She banged until her knuckles bled. Then she noticed a staircase leading down to the basement, a place she hadn't explored. Desperation outweighed fear. She descended. The basement was vast, larger than the inn above could possibly hold. The walls were lined with mirrors, each reflecting not her image but warped versions of herself, screaming, bleeding, dissolving into darkness. In the center, a circle of old candles surrounded a pit of black liquid that shimmered unnaturally. The whispers coalesced here, louder, chanting something in a language she didn't know, yet somehow understood. The hollow demands, the hollow hungers. She noticed names carved into the walls, hundreds of them, dates spanning decades. Visitors, writers, townsfolk, all consumed by the hollow. The inn wasn't abandoned, it was a trap, a feeding ground, and she was next. A figure appeared above the pit. Dressed in tattered robes, face obscured, it extended its hand toward her. "You cannot leave, you belong." Evelyn screamed, but the shadows responded, crawling up from the black liquid, wrapping her legs. She fell in, and for a moment the world became a swirl of faces, screams, and wet darkness. Evelyn awoke on her bed. Morning light streamed weakly through the grimy windows, but nothing felt right. Her body ached as if she had run for miles. Her mind, however, was sharper, aware. She remembered the map in the library and the warning about the third night. This was it. Panic clawed at her. She had to leave. She raced to the car, rain lashing, mud sucking at the tires. But the road was gone, replaced by the twisting forest from which she had emerged. The inn stood behind her, impossibly larger than before, windows like staring eyes. Every shadow in Greybridge moved independently, whispering, pointing, warning, or taunting. She heard footsteps behind her and turning, glimpsed dozens of townsfolk, faceless, moving like puppets, dragging their feet, chanting, "Stay, stay, stay." She ran into the forest, branches slashing her face. Every step brought her back to the inn. The forest itself seemed alive, bending, closing in. She tripped and fell, and in the undergrowth she saw them. Figures she had seen in mirrors, in shadows, in whispers. They reached for her, and the hollows chanting filled the air. Evelyn realized the truth. Greybridge wasn't on a map. The town was a nexus, a place between worlds, feeding on the living to sustain itself. No one left once they entered, and the inn was the heart. As night fell again, the inn's doors opened. Evelyn stood, trapped between the forest and the door. From inside came the whispers, now joined by the groaning, wailing voices of hundreds. "Come, or be consumed." She ran toward the door. Evelyn stumbled through the inn's lobby, gasping. The shadows shifted, twisting into humanoid shapes. Faces emerged, some familiar, some horrifyingly alien, reaching for her with skeletal hands. Their eyes pleaded and cursed at the same time. Who are you?" she whispered. A voice echoed in her mind, cold and hollow. "We are the forgotten, the devoured. We tried to escape like you, but the hollow consumes all." A man stepped forward from the shadows. His skin was pale, eyes sunken, but his voice carried faint hope. The hollow isn't just a place, it's a hunger. It survives on fear, on memories, on life itself. The only way out is to face it, to understand it. Evelyn's stomach twisted. Face it. Yes, the man said, but no one survives unscathed. You can leave the inn if you can resist becoming part of it. He motioned to a narrow hallway lined with doors that hadn't been there before. Each door leads to a memory, a fragment of the hollow. You must confront them. Only then will the exit appear. She felt the walls pulse, almost breathing. A soft, malevolent whisper slithered through the air. No one leaves, no one. But Evelyn had no choice. She stepped through the first door. The room was familiar, her childhood bedroom, but distorted. The walls oozed shadows, and a younger version of herself sat on the bed, staring silently. The shadows stretched from the corners, forming monstrous shapes that mirrored her deepest fears. Loneliness, failure, abandonment. You're not real, Evelyn stammered. Her younger self's voice trembled. I am you what you hide, what you fear the most. The shadows lunged. Evelyn's scream echoed through the room, but she forced herself to stand her ground. I am not afraid. The shadows recoiled, then surged again. Each lunge forced her to relive moments of regret, despair, and terror. Yet as she acknowledged them, numbing each fear aloud, the room shifted. The shadows shrank, the walls solidified, and her reflection returned, whole and unbroken. A door appeared in the far wall. She stepped through, heart pounding. She emerged into a massive chamber beneath the inn. The pit of black liquid from the basement had grown, writhing like a living entity. From its depths rose figures, trapped souls, their faces twisted in agony, hands reaching out. They screamed in unison, feed, consume, join. The robed figure appeared again, now taller, more grotesque. Its voice boomed. You have survived the memory, but can you survive the hunger? Evelyn realized the truth. The hollow didn't just feed on life. It fed on courage, hope, and defiance. Those who succumbed became part of its chorus of whispers, its endless army of shadows. Summoning every ounce of willpower, she grabbed a candle from a nearby stand. Light flared, and the shadows shrieked, recoiling from the flame. Evelyn ran along the chamber's edge, keeping the candle between herself and the writhing mass. The whispers grew frantic, desperate, pleading. You can't, you can't. Evelyn's voice rose over them. I will not be consumed. The pit trembled, and for a moment the chamber shook violently. The shadows screamed in unison, a sound that penetrated her very bones. She felt herself being pulled toward the hollow, dragged by invisible hands. Then the exit appeared, a narrow staircase spiraling upward, bathed in soft, golden light. Evelyn clutched the candle as she raced up the narrow staircase. The whispers of the hollow clawed at her mind, insistent and maddening. Turn back, belong, join us. But each step higher into the light gave her strength. Behind her, the shadows surged, a black tide pouring from the pit below. Faces twisted in agony, mouths stretching impossibly wide, screaming silently. She could see her own reflection among them, distorted, clawing to pull her in. She gasped, nearly falling, but the golden light grew brighter, warming her hands, banishing the shadows at her heels. The whispers screamed, no, no, no. As she reached the top, the doors of the inn's lobby opened, sunlight pouring in, dissolving the shadows at the edges. Evelyn stumbled outside, rain washing over her face. The forest seemed to breathe, alive yet silent now. But Greybridge wasn't done. The town stretched endlessly, streets looping impossibly, houses warped, impossible angles making the landscape feel like a living maze. She realized the hollow didn't just exist in the inn, it was the town itself, a hunger embedded in reality. Evelyn ran, pushing through streets that should have been familiar but were anything but. The faceless townsfolk emerged from the shadows, still whispering, still pleading. Yet every step toward the forest edge felt lighter, freer, the candle's light burning brighter. She reached the edge of the forest, the first real clearing she had seen. The whispers shrieked in fury, echoing through the trees. You cannot leave, you cannot. Evelyn lifted the candle high. Its flame surged, bright enough to burn shadows on contact. The hollow screamed, a cacophony of anguish as the black mist recoiled. She sprinted through the forest, the ground trembling beneath her feet, trees bending as if trying to stop her. Suddenly, the forest opened to the main road. The rain had stopped. Her car was there, gleaming under the morning sun, untouched. Evelyn threw open the door, jumping in, heart pounding. She turned the key. Engine roared to life. As she drove away, Graybridge seemed to shrink behind her. The town now distant, surreal, as if it had never existed. Yet the whispers lingered, faint, just beyond hearing. We will be back. We are always here. Evelyn didn't stop until the town disappeared entirely, swallowed by mist and distance. She knew the hollow waited for her, for the next traveler, for anyone daring enough to stumble into its domain. And though she had escaped, a part of her would forever hear the whispers, a shadow in her mind reminding her of what lurked in Graybridge. The town was empty, abandoned, yet alive, waiting, always waiting. The hollow whispered, and somewhere, someone else listened. The fog rolled over Ravenwood like a living blanket, curling around the skeletal trees and swallowing the cobblestone roads. Amelia's car tires crunched over dead leaves as she drove into the forgotten town. She had inherited the old Ravenwood estate from an uncle she had never met, and curiosity had driven her here, despite the unease creeping in her chest. The town looked abandoned, or at least frozen in time. Windows stared blankly, their glass dull and dusty. Street lamps flickered, struggling to pierce the thick mist. Amelia parked near the estate and stared at the looming silhouette of the mansion. Its blackened walls seemed to breathe with shadows, and the iron gates creaked in the wind. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and something else, something faintly metallic, like blood long dry. The furniture was covered in white sheets, but the outlines of chairs, tables, and an enormous grandfather clock were unmistakable. Amelia shivered, feeling eyes on her from the dark corners. A sudden bang echoed from upstairs as though someone, or something, had slammed a door. Heart racing, she reminded herself she was alone. Still, the sound had a rhythm, almost deliberate, like a warning. Her flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing long cracks in the walls, spiderwebs and dust motes swirling in the beam. Then she heard it, a whisper, soft but unmistakable, coming from the hallway behind her. "Amelia," it called, dragging the syllables. She spun around, flashlight trembling in her hands, but the hallway was empty. A chill crawled down her spine. This was no ordinary house. Something was waiting. Amelia explored the house with hesitant steps, every floorboard groaning under her weight. In the library, she discovered a dusty desk with an old leather-bound diary. She opened it, pages yellowed with age. They watch from the shadows. The walls remember, never trust the mirrors. The handwriting was frantic, scrawled across the pages in black ink. Each entry grew darker. One told of doors that moved on their own, another of whispers at night. The last entry, smeared and almost illegible, simply read, "I see them always, they want me, I cannot leave. They are everywhere." The air grew colder and the diary slipped from her hands as a shadow passed across the room. Amelia looked up, heart hammering. A figure stood at the doorway, blacker than the shadows themselves, faceless. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. Her mind screamed at her to leave, but the curiosity, the morbid pull, kept her rooted. Something in the diary had drawn her here, and now she realized she was not the first to be trapped in Ravenwood's grip. From the hallway, a door slowly creaked open. A foul odor seeped into the library, making her gag. Her flashlight flickered, and she caught a glimpse of writing scratched into the wall. "Do not look behind the mirrors." The house had mirrors in every room, from small hand mirrors to enormous floor-to-ceiling panels. Each reflected not only her image but something else lurking behind her, a dark, twisted silhouette with two long limbs and hollow eyes. Every time she turned to face it, the reflection would be empty. She found herself drawn to the largest mirror in the hallway. It was cracked, jagged lines running across its surface like spider webs. As she leaned closer, she could see her reflection twitch independently of her movements. Her eyes, normally brown, were now black pits staring back. A voice whispered through the mirror, "Join us." Amelia stumbled back, crashing into the wall. The lights went out. In the darkness, she could feel something brushing against her, cold and slimy. She fumbled for her flashlight, finally flicking it on, and saw dozens of shadowy figures emerging from the walls themselves, stretching toward her, mouths opening without sound. She screamed and ran, but the house twisted around her. Hallways that were straight one moment now led into circular staircases. Rooms that should have been behind her were suddenly in front. The house itself was alive, feeding on her fear. Amelia's legs burned as she climbed the winding staircase to the attic. Each step groaned under her weight, as if warning her not to continue. The air grew colder, denser, almost suffocating, and the shadows in the corners seemed to stretch toward her, their forms flickering in the dim light. At last she reached the attic door. The handle was icy to the touch, sending a shiver up her arm. Pushing it open, she found a room filled with old trunks, broken furniture, and more mirrors. Dust floated in the air like tiny ghosts, but what caught her attention was a single rocking chair, moving slowly back and forth as if someone, or something, were sitting in it. Her flashlight swept over the attic, and the beam landed on an old music box. It was ornate, carved with twisting figures, and it played a haunting lullaby all on its own. The melody sent chills racing down her spine. As she approached, the rocking chair stopped, and the shadows in the corners became denser, almost solid. Then she heard it, a whisper closer than ever. "Amelia, join us." The voice was no longer just a whisper. It was inside her head, pressing against her thoughts, invading her mind. She clutched her ears, trying to block it out, but the words only grew louder. A figure stepped out from the darkest corner of the attic. It was taller than any human, its limbs elongated and twisted. Its face was featureless, smooth like black glass, yet somehow she felt its gaze piercing her soul. Amelia stumbled backward, her flashlight falling and spinning across the floor. The shadows surged, reaching for her, their tendrils wrapping around her legs. She fell to the ground, crawling toward the attic stairs, the air thick with the stench of decay and iron. One hand grabbed her ankle, icy and unyielding. She screamed, kicking and clawing at the floorboards, finally freeing herself and bolting down the stairs. The house seemed to laugh, doors slamming and shutters rattling, as if mocking her escape. Bursting through the front door, Amelia stumbled into the fog-shrouded streets. The town was empty, or so it seemed. Streetlights flickered, casting distorted shadows that danced like grotesque puppets. The whispers followed her, echoing from every corner, every alley. She tried to find her car, but the streets had shifted. Buildings appeared where none had been before, alleyways twisted unnaturally. The fog thickened, choking her vision. Then she saw movement, a group of figures emerging silently from the mist. They wore tattered clothing, their faces pale and hollow. Their eyes were black voids, and their mouths moved, whispering words she could not understand. They surrounded her, circling slowly, their presence pressing down on her chest. Amelia stumbled, collapsing to her knees. One figure leaned close, its whisper sharp and cold. "Raven never lets go." Panic surged. She ran blindly, crashing through gates and fences, the fog swallowing her path. The town seemed endless, a labyrinth designed to trap her forever. Every turn led her back to the mansion, looming like a dark sentinel in the mist. It dawned on her. The town itself was part of the house, an extension of its nightmare. Escape was not just difficult, it was impossible. Amelia collapsed behind a toppled fence, gasping for air. Her clothes were torn, and the chill of the fog had seeped into her bones. She forced herself to look back at the mansion, its windows like hollow eyes staring down at her. But now, the house seemed different. She could almost feel it watching her, waiting. Desperate, she tried the car again, only to find it gone. In its place, the ground was cracked, and from the fissures, a faint, red light glowed, pulsing like a heartbeat. Her flashlight flickered, and in that brief illumination, she saw writing etched into the pavement. "You are one of us now." Fear clawed at her mind, but amidst the terror, a spark of determination emerged. She had to know the truth. Amelia retraced her steps to the mansion, avoiding the humanoid shadows that slithered silently behind her. Inside, the house had changed again. The hallways twisted like a maze, doors appearing where there had been walls. At the end of a narrow corridor, she found a hidden door, almost invisible behind a tapestry depicting a tree with gnarled branches. Heart pounding, she opened it. The room inside was circular, lit by a single candle. At the center stood a pedestal, and on it, an ancient book bound in black leather. Its pages were filled with symbols that seemed to writhe under her gaze. She opened it, and words appeared as if written by an unseen hand. "Ravenwood feeds on fear, and fear binds the souls. Those who enter may leave the flesh behind, but never the shadow. The house chooses." Suddenly, the candle flared, and Amelia felt herself pulled toward the book. The shadows from the corners surged forward, twisting into monstrous forms. She tried to scream, but her voice was gone, replaced by the whispers of 1,000 trapped souls. Through the book, she saw visions of the past, families disappearing, travelers vanishing into the mansion, all consumed and bound to Ravenwood. Each shadow she had seen was once human, now transformed into a guardian of the house, eternally hunting those who dared enter. Amelia realized the terrible truth. The mansion had marked her the moment she crossed its threshold. Escape might be impossible, but she would have to fight the darkness or become part of it. The shadows pressed closer, their hollow eyes staring into her soul. Amelia grabbed the book, flipping frantically until she found a passage that promised a way out, a ritual of light and fire. But the ingredients were impossible: ashes from the hearth of the oldest room, water from the well that had long since dried, and a mirror reflecting a living soul. She raced through the mansion, gathering what she could. The hearth was blackened and cold, the mirror cracked but intact, and the well, hidden in the overgrown garden, was dry except for a thin trickle of stagnant water. The house groaned and shifted as if aware of her actions, corridors twisting to block her path, stairs collapsing into nothingness. Finally, she returned to the attic. The shadows surged violently now, their forms thrashing and writhing. Amelia set up the ritual, the ashes in a circle, water sprinkled carefully, and the mirror placed in the center. The house screamed around her, the walls bleeding shadows, the windows rattling as if in protest. Taking a deep breath, Amelia focused, thinking of herself, of her life outside Ravenwood. She whispered the incantation she had memorized, words crawling into her mind as though the house were resisting her will. The mirror's surface rippled, reflecting not her terrified face, but a bright, golden light. For a moment everything froze, the shadows halted, the fog paused midair. Then, with a sound like 1,000 glass shards breaking, the light exploded, consuming the darkness. The attic shook violently as the golden light from the mirror spread through the room. Shadows screamed, twisting into grotesque shapes, their hollow eyes flaring with hatred. Amelia's heart pounded, but she stood her ground, clutching the mirror as the book's words echoed in her mind. One massive shadow surged toward her, limbs stretching impossibly, mouth opening into a black void that seemed to swallow the light. Amelia raised the mirror, letting its reflection catch the creature's gaze. The shadow recoiled, hissing like a wounded animal. Around her, the other shadows writhed, converging into a swirling vortex of darkness. Each reached for her, tendrils slithering like black snakes, but the light from the mirror cut through them, burning away the tendrils that touched it. Amelia felt a pull, as if the house itself were trying to drag her into its walls, but she held firm. Then she saw it, the source. A massive shadow taller than the house, its face a blank void, yet its presence radiating malevolence. The house groaned, the floors cracking beneath it, as if responding to the creature's rage. Amelia realized this was the heart of Ravenwood, the entity that controlled the mansion and the town. "You cannot leave," the voice boomed, echoing through her mind. "All who enter belong to Ravenwood." "I refuse," Amelia shouted, raising the mirror higher. The golden light flared, filling the attic, searing the shadow's forms. The entity shrieked, an unbearable sound that rattled her bones and surged toward her, every step tearing the floorboards. Amelia focused on the thought of life outside Ravenwood, of air, sun, and freedom. She projected every ounce of hope and defiance into the mirror. The entity collided with the reflected light, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Then the impossible happened. The shadow screamed and shattered, its fragments dissolving into nothingness. The other shadows followed, vanishing one by one as the attic's golden light engulfed them. The house shuddered violently, then fell silent. Amelia collapsed to the floor, exhausted, trembling. The fog outside began to lift, and a faint breeze whispered through the broken windows. The house no longer seemed alive. It was just a building, empty and still, its terrible hunger finally stilled. Hours later, Amelia stumbled out of the mansion. The sun was rising over Ravenwood, and for the first time she could see the town clearly. The streets were empty but quiet, peaceful. The fog had lifted, revealing the twisted, overgrown gardens and broken fences. Her car was waiting, untouched, as if the house had finally released her. She climbed in, hands shaking, and drove away, never looking back. Behind her, the mansion loomed silently, shadows retreating into the walls, no longer alive. But as she drove, she noticed something unnerving. The rearview mirror reflected the road behind her, but also, faintly, a shadow. It moved independently, darker than the morning light, watching her. She blinked, and it was gone. Amelia knew deep down that Ravenwood would never truly let go, but she was alive, and for now that was enough. Amelia drove for hours, leaving Ravenwood far behind. The road stretched endlessly, flanked by dense forests that seemed normal, mundane compared to the nightmare she had escaped. She tried to shake off the memories, the shadows, the whispers, the sense of being watched, but they clung to her mind like cobwebs. That night in a small motel on the outskirts of a distant town, she finally slept. Yet, even in the safety of four walls, sleep was restless. In her dreams, the mansion loomed again, windows glowing with an eerie light, doors opening and closing in time with a heartbeat that wasn't hers. She awoke with a start, heart hammering. The next morning, Amelia tried to convince herself it was over. Ravenwood was behind her. She had survived. But when she reached for her mirror to check her reflection, she froze. Her eyes, once brown, now held tiny flecks of black like smoke drifting at the edges. And in the corner of the mirror, she swore she saw a shadow, tall, faceless, watching. Her phone buzzed, a notification. She ignored it at first, but it vibrated insistently. She opened it, a single message. "We never forget." No sender, no number, just those words burning on the screen like a warning. Her blood ran cold. Amelia tried to leave town again, but the streets seemed different, unfamiliar. It was as if Ravenwood had left a mark on her, a tether to its shadows that no distance could break. Every reflective surface, mirrors, windows, even puddles, threatened to show her the other world lurking just beyond the glass. She realized the terrifying truth. Escaping Ravenwood wasn't enough. The house had claimed part of her, woven its darkness into her soul. She was free physically, but the shadows were patient. They would wait. They would follow. And one day, when the fear was ripe, they would come for her again. As she looked out the motel window, the sun rose over the horizon, golden and innocent. And yet behind its warmth, a shadow flickered. A dark silhouette in the distance, motionless, waiting. Amelia shivered. Ravenwood was gone for now, but she knew deep down the darkness never truly dies. It waits, and it always remembers. The end. The lighthouse had stood for a century on the jagged cliffs of Blackwater Point, its paint peeling, its light flickering in the fog. No one attended it for decades, yet it remained, stubborn and unyielding, overlooking the endless gray sea. Jonah had been drawn there by rumors, tales of a keeper who had vanished one stormy night, leaving the lighthouse abandoned. Curiosity outweighed caution, and he drove hours along crumbling coastal roads, the wind whipping through the salt-laden air. The path to the lighthouse was narrow, flanked by cliffs and jagged rocks. The waves below crashed with relentless fury, echoing against the cliffs like drums of warning. Jonah parked his car at the edge of the path, staring up at the towering structure. Its windows were black eyes, empty and unblinking, and the door, though weathered and cracked, seemed almost to breathe as it swayed in the wind. He pushed the door open. The smell hit immediately, brine, decay, and something faintly metallic like blood. Dust coated the spiral staircase and broken furniture lay strewn about. Jonah's flashlight cut through the gloom. The air felt thick, alive somehow, and with every step he felt unseen eyes tracking him. Night fell quickly. Fog rolled in thick from the sea, swallowing sound and blurring the cliffs. Jonah ascended the spiral stairs to the lantern room. The glass panes were cracked, the mechanism rusted, yet the lamp glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. As he approached, a whisper echoed through the chamber. Don't look." He spun, but the room was empty. Only the roar of the sea outside and the pulsing lamp, which seemed to anticipate his fear. Over the next days, Jonah realized the lighthouse was a labyrinth. Stairs led to rooms with no doors, hallways looped impossibly, and doors opened to cliffs instead of corridors. Shadows clung to corners, vanishing when looked at directly but reappearing closer with each blink. The house seemed alive, anticipating his movements, testing him. Voices began in the walls, muted at first, then insistent, calling his name, recounting memories he had never lived, revealing secrets he did not know. He tried to rationalize it as isolation, exhaustion, wind, but deep down, he knew something else was at work. One night he awoke to a figure at the top of the spiral staircase. It was a man tall and gaunt, face obscured by shadow. His mouth opened, but no words emerged, only a presence that filled the room. Jonah ran down the stairs, only to find the lighthouse itself shifting. Hallways twisted, doors vanished, staircases spiraled endlessly. Escape was impossible. In desperation, he discovered journals hidden behind loose stones in the walls. Each chronicled the fate of previous keepers, whispers, shadows, impossible architecture, and eventual surrender. Each ended abruptly with a warning. The lighthouse remembers. Do not stay. By the end of the first week, Jonah's mind began to fray. Shadows became tangible, brushing against his skin, tugging at his clothing, whispering in voices that mimicked friends and family. Dreams and reality blurred. Hallways stretched into infinity. Staircases twisted upward into darkness. Doors opened to rooms filled with pale, hollow-eyed figures. The lamp at the top of the lighthouse pulsed brighter with his heartbeat. In its light, he sometimes glimpsed faces, countless, watching, trapped behind the glass. He attempted to leave, but the fog was thick, the cliffs steeper, and the lighthouse loomed ever taller, as if it were growing to block his escape. The whispers grew louder, now in unison. "Stay, we are waiting, you belong here." Jonah realized fully the lighthouse was not abandoned. It was alive, sentient, feeding on fear, bending reality and shaping his mind. He tried to resist, but his consciousness began to fracture, stretching thin across the endless corridors, through shadows, across the spiral stairs. Weeks passed. Jonah's isolation was complete. The shadows moved with purpose, forming grotesque parodies of people he knew or thought he knew. Mirrors reflected impossible realities, hallways without end, faces twisted in silent screams. The lamp pulsed steadily, a heartbeat echoing inside his own chest. He climbed the stairs again, drawn to the lantern room, and saw them, previous keepers, pale and hollow-eyed, circling the lamp. They whispered together, voices layered with centuries of fear. Join us or be lost forever. The lantern glowed violently, and Jonah felt himself pulled toward it. Consciousness fractured further, fragments scattering into walls, shadows, the spiral stairs. Resistance was meaningless. The house and lighthouse were one, and he was becoming a part of them. By the fourth week, Jonah could no longer distinguish between himself and the lighthouse. Hallways twisted endlessly, doors opened to cliffs or nothing at all. The shadows whispered in unison, recounting his deepest fears, mimicking memories he had never lived. His own voice responded to it, foreign and distant. The lamp pulsed brighter, illuminating the lantern room in stark, harsh light. His reflection moved independently, speaking with authority he could no longer resist. You are ours, you belong here. Jonah's mind split completely. Rooms, shadows, and whispers merged into one entity. Escape was impossible. His identity dissolved, scattered across the house, becoming a thread in the lighthouse's endless web. By the fifth week, Jonah was gone, or rather, fully absorbed. The lighthouse pulsed with life, its corridors twisting endlessly, shadows whispering, mirrors reflecting horrors beyond comprehension. Outside, the sea crashed against the cliffs. The town remained oblivious, and the lamp glowed faintly, like a heartbeat. Inside, the lighthouse held him and all who came before, an eternal prison. Shadows whispered for eternity, calling endlessly for the next curious soul. Jonah's consciousness was now part of the sentient lighthouse, one of countless threads woven into its endless, living maze. And somewhere in the lantern room, a faint whisper echoed, patient and eternal. Come join us forever. Asherbrook Asylum had been abandoned for nearly 50 years, yet it still drew the curious and the reckless alike. Its walls were crumbling, windows boarded, and the iron gates rusted shut, but its presence loomed like a warning. Mara had been fascinated with urban legends for years, but tonight curiosity outweighed caution. She climbed over the gate, the cold metal biting her palms, and stepped into the grounds. The wind moaned through the empty halls, carrying a faint metallic tang she couldn't place. Inside, the asylum was a ruin, peeling paint, shattered glass, and the smell of mold filling every corner. Sunlight barely pierced the grime-coated windows, leaving shadows that twisted unnaturally across cracked floors. Mara noticed remnants of lives once lived, overturned wheelchairs, torn patient files. Chairs with straps long rotted away. The corridors twisted in ways that made it impossible to memorize their layout, and the deeper she went, the heavier the air felt. By nightfall, the asylum became a maze. Every hallway seemed longer, staircases rose impossibly, and doors opened into rooms that did not belong. A faint whisper echoed down a corridor. Do not come here. She froze. Her flashlight beam revealed nothing. Shadows moved independently across the cracked floors, disappearing when approached but always reappearing, always closer. The first night was restless. Mara slept among dusty patient records, but dreams were worse than waking. Hallways stretched endlessly, doors led to more doors, and figures with hollow eyes watched silently, following her through impossible spaces. Shadows lingered when she woke, corners never safe, light never sufficient. In the east wing, she discovered a door locked from the inside. Faint light pulsed beneath it. When she pressed her ear to the door, she heard faint chanting layered with whispers that spoke directly into her mind. Desperation drove her to explore further, and she found hidden patient journals behind loose panels. Each told the story of the asylum's horrors, voices calling patients to non-existent rooms, shadows pressing against walls and ceilings, and some patients vanishing entirely. One journal ended with a scrawled warning. The asylum is alive. It feeds on fear. If you hear it calling, do not follow. At first, Mara laughed nervously at the warnings, but the asylum was awake. Figures with faces she recognized, or thought she recognized, wandered the corridors. Shadows whispered secrets of the building, numbing rooms she had never entered, recounting events she had never witnessed. One night she approached the locked east wing door again. The chanting had grown louder, insistent. Trembling, she forced it open. Inside, the room stretched impossibly high, ceilings lost in shadow, walls pulsing as if breathing. Figures moved inside, pale and hollow-eyed. They whispered her name, beckoning her deeper. When she stepped forward, the floor shifted like liquid, bending reality. Time and space warped. Days merged into nights. Hallways looped endlessly. Shadows pressed closer. Her mind began to fragment. Mirrors reflected her own image, moving independently, whispering twisted truths. Mara tried to flee, but the gates were gone, the path outside swallowed by mist. Rooms became staircases, staircases became walls. Every door led her further into the asylum's heart. The chanting became a chorus of voices, ancient and patient, insisting she belonged, that the asylum always claimed what it was owed. Her body wandered endlessly, guided by unseen hands. Shadows followed, sometimes forming faces of staff or patients from the journals she had read. Her consciousness splintered, stretching across walls, hallways, and shadows. Resistance was futile. Every fear she had ever known, every memory she cherished, became part of the asylum's tapestry. By the fourth week, Mara's identity had ceased to be whole. Shadows whispered constantly, echoing her own thoughts. Mirrors reflected multiple versions of her, each fragment speaking in discordant voices. She wandered endless corridors, staircases twisting impossibly, doors opening into nothing, her mind consumed by the asylum's will. The east wing pulsed like a heart. Light glowed faintly from cracks in walls as if the building itself were alive. The whispers of past patients intertwined with her own consciousness. Mara understood them. The asylum was not simply a building. It was sentient, patient, eternal, feeding on the minds of all who entered. By the fifth week, Mara was no longer merely a person inside the asylum. She was part of it. Shadows circled her, whispers filled every corner, mirrors reflected infinite fragments of her fractured consciousness. The east wing remained alive, its light pulsing, beckoning endlessly. Outside, the abandoned asylum appeared dormant, a relic of history. Locals told tales of disappearances, whispers on windy nights, flickering lights in inaccessible rooms. Inside, the asylum waited, patient and eternal, ready to claim the next curious soul. And somewhere in the twisting corridors, a faint, eternal whisper echoed. Come stay, forever. The village of Elderwood had always warned travelers never to enter the forest at night. Tales of disappearances, voices calling from the trees and shadows that moved independently were whispered over fires and in church pews. Jonas was not a believer. A seasoned hiker and amateur documentarian, he laughed at superstition. With camera in hand, he ventured into the forest just as dusk fell, determined to capture the truth. The trees were tall, ancient, and impossibly dense. Even as the sun sank, the canopy above let in little light. Shadows stretched long and thin, moving oddly with the wind, or sometimes when there was no wind at all. Jonas pressed forward, recording video, narrating into his camera, joking about ghost stories to calm his nerves. As night fell, the forest grew unnaturally silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. No rustle of leaves, no distant animal calls. Then he heard it, faint whispering, distant but undeniably human. Jonas, come closer. He spun, flashlight cutting into the darkness. Nothing. The whisper repeated, closer, yet somehow coming from all directions. Jonas laughed nervously, trying to rationalize it. Perhaps hikers ahead, perhaps echoes, but the whisper knew his name. Hours passed. Jonas wandered deeper, feeling increasingly disoriented. Paths looped back on themselves. Landmarks he had noted disappeared, replaced by unfamiliar trees and undergrowth. Shadows clung to the edges of his vision, vanishing when looked at directly, only to reappear closer when he looked away. At the center of the forest, he stumbled upon an old clearing. In the moonlight, he saw remnants of a village long forgotten. Crumbling huts, charred fences, overgrown graves. The air was heavy, suffocating even, filled with faint murmurs. As he stepped closer, the whispers coalesced into voices, crying, laughing, screaming all at once. Jonas raised his camera, but the screen went black. He tried to lead, but the forest refused. Trails twisted impossibly, trees shifted subtly, blocking exits. Every path led back to the clearing, the whispers growing louder, insistent. Stay with us, forever. Sleep became impossible. Jonas dozed beneath trees, only to wake to visions of figures with hollow eyes emerging from the shadows. They mimicked his movements, stepped silently behind him, vanished when he turned. Sometimes he glimpsed his own face in their eyes, pale and distorted, reflecting fear he had never felt before. On the fifth night, he discovered an old stone altar in the clearing, covered in runes that seemed to writhe in faint moonlight. When he approached, the voices spoke in unison. "You are ours, you cannot leave. You belong here." The forest seemed to pulse, breathing like a living creature. Trees shifted, ground warped beneath his feet. Shadows merged fully with the figures around the altar. Jonas's reflection appeared in the bark of the trees, staring back at him with hollow eyes. Panic overwhelmed him, yet he could not turn away. Time merged into an endless nightmare. Paths he had taken before now twisted in impossible directions. Every tree, every shadow, every sound became alive, moving in ways that made no sense. Whispers became a chorus, layered with voices of the lost, calling out to him, mocking him, guiding him deeper. Jonas's consciousness began to fragment. He felt pulled in 100 directions at once, toward the shadows, into the trees, across the endless undergrowth. Every scream, every rustle, every whisper etched itself into his mind, bending it, stretching it until he was no longer certain where he ended and the forest began. The clearing remained his center, the altar glowing faintly. Every step toward it felt inevitable, every retreat impossible. The forest had learned him, anticipated him, and he was trapped within its living maze. By the seventh night, Jonas's mind was no longer fully his own. Shadows whispered constantly, echoing his own thoughts, reshaping memories, altering perceptions. Trees twisted impossibly. The ground rose and fell under his feet, hallways of foliage opening into endless darkness. Figures emerged from the shadows, merging with him, showing reflections of himself, fractured, hollow-eyed, and pale. He understood fully. The forest was alive, sentient, eternal, feeding on those who wandered within. His voice joined the whispers. His eyes became part of the shadows. His body moved as the forest willed, endlessly wandering through the dark, tangled maze. Outside, Elderwood remained oblivious. Villagers spoke of travelers who vanished, of voices heard in the trees, lights flickering in the dark. But inside the forest of hollow echoes, Jonas had become one with it. The clearing glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Shadows whispered for eternity, calling endlessly for the next curious soul. Jonas, or what remained of him, wandered endlessly, a fragment of consciousness stretched across trees, shadows, and whispers. Every new voice, every new step, was absorbed into the forest's eternal web. And somewhere just beyond sight, the same whisper echoed, patient, eternal. Come join us forever.